Assalamu alaikum and welcome to a new edition of episode 1 of season 14 of Bookbytes. We have a very exciting start to this particular season. I think we live in a world where there's so much of consideration around progress moving forward, and we're really on a rat race. We're moving at such a speed, and there's just so much of technological change demands on us in life, and a world that's really upside down in so many ways. In this struggle for good versus evil, we do thirst for a kind of spiritual leadership, for scholarship that takes us back to our roots, that helps us to understand what it means to reach back into a real kind of contentment, finding divine connection and peace. One of the ancient scholars, a female Sufi by the name of Rabiah Al Basriyyah, or lovingly known as Rabiah Basri, as we would have all have known about, was written widely about over the years, and there's an international scope of material that we can always draw on. And for the first time, we actually have um, beautiful book, a publication, a commentary by a South African scholar. I had great pleasure going through this volume, reading it. It's the kind of book that you want to pick up again and again. And we've all heard of, the famous saying of Rabiah Al Basriyyah, she speaks about not wanting to worship the Almighty Allah out of fear of hell or thirst for heaven, but purely for vision and for presence and for wanting to be in the presence of Allah. So this book says it perfectly. The book is more than her story, it's an invitation to rethink why we worship, to purify what we seek, to love not for what Allah gives, not for what He withholds, but purely for who He is. In an age restless for meaning yet crowded with performance, through Rabia, we are drawn to the question that defines every believer: do I worship Allah for His bounties or for Allah Himself? Her life answers not with arguments but with Noor. We welcome today on Book Bites with great pleasure Mulana Mohammed Rajah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Assalamu alaikum, Mulana Mohammed. I'm not sure why we're not able to get hold of our guest. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the show, Mulana Rajah. We do have Mulana on a phone broadcast and not on the direct line. I'm just going to try and find out why we're not able to reach him or hear him. Assalamu alaikum, and we're back on track. We are reviewing Rabiah Al Basriyyah on today's episode one of season 14. A beautiful book, a beautiful compilation of commentary on the life of Rabiah Basri. And we have with us Maulana Mohammed Rajah. I'm really looking forward to getting into the mind and the inspiration of such a unique character and this kind of spiritual thirst that we have to understand somebody of this nature, somebody of this caliber, and what it means for us in today's times as well. Assalamu alaikum, Maulana Muhammad Raja. Welcome to the show. I'm not sure if we have Maulana back online. While we're waiting, I also want to just talk about the importance of writing such an incredible biography for today's times. And this is something that I thought about while I was reading this book these past few days. Much has been written. There's a lot of scholarship around the history and the story of Rabia Basri. So to have a local scholar having done such a thorough and intensive write up and research is an incredible opportunity, I think, for us to find personal meaning, local meaning to our times and to the lives that we live. Assalamu alaikum, Mulana Muhammad. Welcome to the show.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now, Mulana.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. How are you?
Wa alaikum salam. Jazakallah khair for joining us and Mubarak on a successful write up of such an important character. I don't want to waste more time. Maybe we should get right into it. Mulana, give us some of your background and your motivation for writing up and specifically choosing this individual, Rabiah Al Basriyyah.
Okay. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Nahmadu wa nusalli ala Rasulil Karim wa ba'd. My name is Maulana Muhammad Rajah. I've been running a publishing initiative called Miraf Publishers. We've been focusing basically on producing English biographies of great Islamic figures over the past 13 centuries or more. The inspiration of this project, it basically stemmed from a very close friend of mine whose passion for books and knowledge has sparked its creation. We identified a real gap as far as books that are available in English for the layman to pick up and read. There are very few that's accessible or well-researched English works of the great scholars and the saints in Islam. So we decided to fill that gap, inshallah. That's our intention. So far, we've actually published 5 books, one on Sheikh Izzuddin al-Qassam, on Saifuddin Qutuz, on Ibrahim ibn Adam rahimahullah, on Nuruddin Zanki rahimahullah, and now this latest one on Rabiah Basriyyah rahimahullah. Several more works are in the progress. But let me be honest, my main intention for getting behind this whole project is I've always been a lover of history. I've studied history throughout my school career. I love the stories of the awliya. Within their lives, I've always found very important lessons which are applicable to my life today. I've had the privilege of doing the alim classes, but there was one moment that stood out for me out of everything. It was at the completion of my alim classes. My ustad told me something that I'll never forget. He told me that now that you've qualified as an alim, you actually have only become a student of deen. He said deen itself is so deep that now you can study deen. He said you've learned the foundations, now your real work begins to go deeper and to swim in that ocean of knowledge. That has stayed with me from the moment it was said to me. It made me realize that everything I'd learned from him was just the foam of the ocean, and now there's an entire ocean for me to explore. Why we chose biographies? Because I've learned something that in studying the life of someone else, you inevitably find something about that person's life that's applicable to your life. And it all depends on the situation that you at it at that point in your life. There's always something that you can grab from somebody else's life. Now, the reason we chose the lives of all these great Islamic figures is because today what we need in the ummah is we need people to stand up like how these people stood up and to live our lives the way these people lived their lives. In order for us to be successful in dunya, in qabr, and in akhirat, we have to adopt their manner of living. This whole project on Rabiah Basriyyah, this originally, to be honest with you, it wasn't my idea. It was my wife who suggested it to me. She said that we've covered already so many men, but now we need to write about a woman. The impact will be different, and the readers, since majority of the readers of my book so far have been women, she said we need something that women can see themselves in, and she was right. So I noticed this even before the publishing was done, that the readers who connected most deeply with the story of Rabia, with her biography and her life, were often women. They saw themselves in her story. They saw themselves in her struggles, her devotion, her voice, in everything about Rabiah Basriyyah. And I realized that there are very few English works out there that presents female spiritual figures. There was one Darul Ulum that I went to go and visit down in Isipingo. They showed me biographies. It's like a collective biography of about 10, 15 women in one. And they showed me there's about 5 or 10 pages per individual. So they said that none of these biographies actually go deep into the life of a person. So then that's when I decided, you know what, this work on Rabiah Basriyyah is very, very important. So after observing that and listening to my wife's suggestion, it became a very important part of my motivation behind doing this work. But beyond all of that, I have to say that in doing this biography, it affected me the most personally. It's like I mentioned in the preface of the book, that the story of Rabiah Basriyyah, in doing it, it didn't offer me comfort. She offered me an exposure. Words that were held, it's like this book held a mirror for my own intentions behind even the compilation of this book. And I couldn't look away. That's why I had to write about Rabiah Basriyyah, rahimahullah. But let me be clear about something from the very beginning. This entire effort, this book, this interview, our work, everything that we put into the production of this, is our ultimate aim and goal is to please Allah and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and to bring our lives onto that pattern which will be pleasing to Allah when we leave this world. Rabiah Basriyyah was a means, she's a window, and what Rabiah Basriyyah rahmatullahi alayhi used to do in her life was she used to always point to the creator and not the creation. She focused on her akhirat, she never focused on her dunya. She shifted her entire attention away from amal, to shift her entire attention towards amal. And the path that she walked was the path of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Without that foundation, her life makes no sense. So as we speak about her, we're really speaking about the love of Allah and the following of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Malana, we are so grateful to have this opportunity to speak to you, especially knowing your intentions behind these projects and this one in particular. Whenever I've read about Rabia Basri, I've always encountered this, and you do hint at this in the book, is this question around how we are motivated by a sense of morality as human beings universally and as Muslims in particular, but also, the thought that we are motivated by positive and negative reinforcement, right? Reward and punishment. So we motivated as humans to have those kinds of those derivatives. Either we good or we forbid evil based on what can be encountered, the rewards and the punishments of that. Here was an individual who went beyond that, whose spirituality was so profound and her love of the divine was so profound that it went beyond that. Let's talk a little bit about that perspective and how we can encounter that and encourage that in our own lives.
100%. I love that question. See, Rabiah Basriyyah, there was a spiritual, for every one of us, there's a spiritual ladder for us to climb, right? So Rabiah Basriyyah, she wasn't born at the peak of love for Allah. Rabiah Basriyyah went through different phases and stages in her life. And Rabiah Basriyyah was being molded into reaching the height of love for Allah. That's why she used to make that dua. And that's why I've written it on the back cover as well, that why do we worship Allah? Is it for fear of Jannah, hope for Jannah, or is it for Allah alone? Her famous dua was that, oh Allah, if I worship you out of fear of Jahannam, then burn me in it. And if I worship you out of a desire for Jannah, then withhold Jannah from me. But if I worship you for your own sake, then do not deprive me of seeing you. See, this dua is so powerful, because this is like the crux of ikhlas, of sincerity of intention. And you see, innamal a'malu bin niyat, every action will be judged according to its intention. So Rabiah Basriyyah, she basically molded her entire life into this. There's one point that I make in the book as well. There's a story of Rabah, rahimahullah, where he was once sitting with one of the children from his family in his hands. And on holding that child, he like loved that that child so much. And then Rabiah Basriyyah, rahimahullah, she reprimanded him. And she said that heart of yours, which is supposed to be filled with the love of Allah, how can it be filled with the love of this child? So he fainted. So when he woke up, then he said to Rabiah Basriyyah, he said the crux of the story is basically this. We explained to her that my reason for loving this child is because Allah has commanded me to love this child. So you see, the niyat and intention behind everything in our lives is to come onto this basis. That everything I do, that whether I go to work, or whether I look after my family, whether I love my wife, I love my children, I love family members, I join family ties, all of these actions, if it is based solely on pleasing Allah, on the love of Allah, then it carries such weight in the eyes of Allah that it becomes valuable. And you see, this is the key thing that we all need to take from this book, is that Rabiah Basriyyah, she lived a life of ikhlas, of sincerity of intention. And when she lived that life of sincerity, her entire life was based on that sincerity, on love for Allah. Rabiah Basriyyah used to always focus on that. When she reprimanded people because of a love for Allah. When she used to counsel people, that's in a good way, she used to counsel them only for the love of Allah. Whatever she said, whatever she did, in the book it's also written that at the later stage of Rabiah Basriyyah's life, how her entire life then shifted onto Quran, where every time she spoke or she said something, she based it on Quran. She didn't base it on anything else. And Rabiah Basriyyah used to do that because she said that the only words that carry value is the words of Allah, and that is the words of the Quran. And she used to use that throughout her life, towards the end of her life. So you see, Rabiah Basriyyah climbed the spiritual ladder. So she wasn't born in that peak of love for Allah. So you see, we today, in our lives, we have to look at our lives and see that how we can also climb that ladder. See, every ummati of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is standing at a ladder. Whether we're standing at that ladder with fear or hope in our heart, with fear of Jahannam or hope for Jannat, irrespective, we're standing at that ladder. And it's a ladder for us to climb in our spirituality. Our time in dunya is not for anything else besides to climb that spiritual ladder. Everything else in our lives has to be based on the command of Allah. Our working must be based on the command of Allah. Our eating and sleeping, everything has to be based on the command of Allah in order for it to be valuable in our life.
So, Milana, you allude to this idea of spiritual ascension. Let's
Mm.
understand the concept of sainthood from an Islamic perspective, and the concept of awliya. Can you give us some indication of how we understand that as Muslims, what this means, and in a way, how incredibly fortunate we are to have role models within this lineage, especially for us as women as well, and being able to write it and present this material in English so that it's not just acceptable, available, and accessible to Muslim readers, but beyond that as well.
You see, as far as spirituality goes, like I was explaining just now, that there's a ladder, you know, and that ladder for us to climb is pretty clear. The commands of Allah are pretty clear. The Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam are pretty clear for us to follow. In adopting and following that way of life is how we climb the spiritual ladder. But now, Rabiah Basriyyah and the Awliya Ikram, when we read about them and we read about their life and we hear their sayings and their admonitions for people, we see that their whole understanding of life was different to ours. It's like, today we become so caught up in our dunya that our focus is only on that. That, today we look at our gain or loss of dunya, we look at anything that's going to benefit us. And when you look at the lives of Rabiah, you look at the lives of the Awliya Ikram, you see that their whole focus shifted to something else. Like Rabiah Basriyyah, she wasn't focused on her increase of dunya. She wasn't increased on any of that increasing. The only concern that Rabiah Basriyyah had, and she used to question herself, every single day she used to question herself, that today has my relationship with Allah improved or has my relationship with Allah decreased? Rabiah Basriyyah, there's like her entire biography is filled with such depth that one reader gave me a comment once. They said they completed the whole book on Rabiah Basriyyah. They said when they open it up the second time, the book has a different meaning. It's like now they were understanding the book differently to how when they read it the first time. So I said, yeah, this is the ultimate goal, is that when you're reading this book on Rabiah Basriyyah, it must inspire you and it must lift you up spiritually, so that when you open the book the second time, it has to take you higher and higher and higher. The whole mention of Rabiah Basriyyah, rahimahullah, the mention of her shifting, like the dua we just mentioned just now, how she wanted to shift the motivation away from Jannat and Jahannam towards the love of Allah alone. And in like shifting her focus towards that, it's for us to sit, to look at Rabiah Basriyyah, and for us to say that when I am performing any action, when I'm performing salah, for example, when I'm performing my salah, why am I performing it? Am I performing it as a ritual? Am I performing it with an intention to please Allah? Am I intentioning it? Am I making the intention behind the performance of that salah to gain closeness with Allah? You see, all of that shit boils down to our intention and our focus. Now, she Rabiah Basriyyah was a spiritual authority. Rabiah Basriyyah, even though she was a woman, she was the type that in her time, a lot of the other awliya ikram used to come and sit to take counsel from Rabiah Basriyyah. They used to come and sit to, like sometimes to be reprimanded. There's one famous story of Sufyan Thawri, where Sufyan Thawri, rahimahullah, was once visiting and he raised his hands in the dua and he said in the dua that, "Oh Allah, be pleased with me." So Rabiah Basriyyah immediately responded to him and she said, "Oh Sufyan, are you not ashamed to ask for the pleasure of the one with whom you yourself are not pleased with?" She was pointing out how he prayed for the pleasure of Allah while his own heart was not yet content with whatever Allah has decreed for him, whether it's ease or hardship. On this year, Sufyan Thawri wept and he sought forgiveness from Allah. This authority that Rabiah Basriyyah held over these awliya ikram was also, it was like an encouragement for the men of her time also to get counsel and advice from Rabiah Basriyyah.
We often hear in our sort of life coaching or whatever the kind of new age terminology brings in this concept of being grateful, the concept of having trust. But this goes back these hundreds of these all these centuries to examples such as the lives of Rabiah Basriyyah. And let's talk about the concept of tawakkul, Mulana, because I don't think that there's an adequate translation for us. And it's not as frivolous as just being grateful and just having trust. Let's talk fully about the concept of tawakkul based on her life experiences, her life example, and what that means for us in today's times.
The tawakkul that Rabiah Basriyyah had, right, was absolute tawakkul. Rabiah Basriyyah, she made a covenant with Allah that she would never ask any human being for anything. She kept that covenant for decades throughout her life. But there's something, I also want to mention this point because I also think it's also important, especially for the young couples who are having children and that type of a thing, because the story of Rabiah Basriyyah in the initial stage where he talks of her father, Sheikh Ismail, rahimahullah, he was a man of deep poverty, deeper contentment. He made a solemn vow never to ask anything from anyone. Then even in hunger, he endured it with silence. He taught his daughters this by his example, that stretching one's hand before creation is a mark of spiritual poverty, while depending solely on Allah is where our true honor lies. This raises a very, very crucial point about the upbringing. You see, Rabiah Basriyyah, she was only 5 years old when her father passed away. But those 5 years were enough for the seed to be planted within Rabiah Basriyyah of what tawakkul actually is. She watched her father, she internalized the trust that he showed he had for Allah. And when he was gone, she built upon that foundation for the rest of her life. See, tawakkul is an amazing quality. I remember I was taught this I'd say about 20 years ago. I remember someone explaining the concept of tawakkul to me. And in explaining the concept of tawakkul, they gave it very beautifully. You see, tawakkul is for a person to use the means that Allah has given them access to use that means to its maximum. And beyond that, to rely and trust on Allah to fulfill your goal or your target. In every single thing we do in our lives, this has to become our primary goal and focus. That whatever means Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put for me to use, I will use. But beyond that, I still rely and depend on Allah to give me the goal. Now you see, Rabiah Basriyyah, in teaching us another like level of tawakkul, Rabiah Basriyyah was teaching us that, you know what, forget your needs of dunya. Rabiah Basriyyah had that tawakkul in Allah, depending on Allah for her akhirat. So Rabiah Basriyyah shifted her focus away from gaining Jannah towards Allah alone, because she's, this Marfman, there's one story is popping in my head now. It's a story I remember from many, many years ago, where there's one king in his court. He invited the people over and he made a statement that whatever you can touch in this palace is yours. So everyone ran for the curtains, the gold cups, the gold dishes, and everything. They ran to grab it. One slave of his put his hand on the king. So the king smiled at him when he asked him that, why did you do that? So he said, because I understand that if I have the king, then I have the entire kingdom. Now Rabiah Basriyyah understood this, that if I have Allah, then I have the entire creation at my feet. Rabiah Basriyyah understood this. That's why she didn't even strive for Jannat or Jannam. She strove only for Allah. So, her father taught her this quality of tawakkul from the time she was a baby. And this is very important for people to always keep in mind, that initial stage of raising a child, whatever we inculcate or whatever we show that child by living example, is what gets embedded in that child's heart for the rest of their life. So, Rabiah Basriyyah, Maaf, I hope I'm not taking up too much of time. Rabiah Basriyyah,
We're
there's a
very
very,
happy
very
to we're
powerful,
very happy to hear your thoughts, Malana. Jazakallah.
there's a very, very like powerful story on Rabiah Basriyyah and Tawakkul mentioned in the book, that once and it's not just a story, there's a lesson in the story. And this was a learning stage of Rabiah Basriyyah, where at one stage she fasted for 7 days. Right? She used to have water every day to break her fast. That was it. So on the 8th day, she became so unbearably hungry that, this thought like settled in her mind that, I can't take this anymore. So someone knocked on the door with a bowl of food. So she took the food. She said to herself that now your plea has been answered. I'll try never to starve you again. She was talking to herself, to her nafs. So she placed the bowl on the floor. She rose to light a lamp. At that moment, this cat entered, overturned the bowl, spilled the food. She reached for the water to break her fast. But as she did that, the strong gust of wind blew in, extinguishing the lamp, knocking over the water vessel as well. And then this deep sigh escaped from Rabiah Basriyyah, where she said that, "Oh Allah, what is happening to me?" Then a voice replied from the unseen, and he said that if you desire the comfort of this world, then we will grant it to you. But in return, we shall remove from your heart the pain and the longing that binds you to us. Know that worldly desire and the love of Allah cannot live together in one heart. So Rabiah Basriyyah understood this. She bowed her head and she chose the love of Allah. From that day, she abandoned all worldly desires. She had no desire for dunya at all. So her tawakkul was based on her reliance and dependence on Allah to such an extent that she never ever shifted her focus or her attention to anything of dunya. She never ever relied on the means of dunya for any. None of this dunya was going to benefit Rabia in any way. When her tawakkul shifted, because her whole goal and motivation in her life shifted to Allah. So if you rely on Allah and you depend on Allah, your tawakkul, it becomes so perfect the moment you reach that stage where you understand that my acquisition of Jannat or my acquisition of closeness, relationship to Allah. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said something to this effect. He said that a person will never gain entry into Jannah because of his amal. He said a person can only gain entry into Jannah through the mercy of Allah. So Aisha radiallahu anha asked him that, "O Nabi of Allah, and you?" He said, "Me also, I can only get access to Jannah through the mercy of Allah." So Rabiah Basriyyah understood this, that the only way for me to gain success in dunya, qabr and akhirat is by my dependence and reliance on Allah. So you see, she perfected the quality of tawakkul, where your reliance and dependence gets so fixed on Allah that you understand Allah is the one who takes care of all of my needs. I hope that clarified things.
It's truly very special examples of saints who are able to ascend so quickly through these stages of, we could say, psychological development, we could say self-actualization. We taught this concept of piety, something within our reach. Malana, do you think, and I'm going to tend to the ideological now, do you think that piety is something that can be attained, or is it a constant, sort of searching and seeking through our lives? And are we, caught up in this world as the way it is? Are we able to attain such lofty goals?
Beautiful question. And a book like this book, for argument's sake, it's this book is not just about information; it's about transformation. And in this book itself, I'm hoping that people will take away three things from this book because it's going to answer your question perfectly. Rabiah Basriyyah, she showed us that the path to Allah is always open to everyone. Rabiah Basriyyah, she was an orphan. She was sold into slavery for 6 dirhams. She was a woman. She had no wealth, no status, no formal teacher. And yet she became one of the most authoritative spiritual voices in Islamic history. But no one can say that my circumstances or my conditions in life prevent me from climbing that ladder of spirituality. The only thing that matters is our sincerity behind doing and following that route. This is where we'll find liberation, and this is where we'll find hope and dependence on Allah. You know, the I hope
Subhanallah.
that we I hope that we can see that Islam is so rich with female role models whose stories have been neglected. And this is one of the reasons I did this book. The women like Rabiah Basriyyah. In the book itself, there's a story mention of Hayuna, of Abda, of great female figures that are like central to the development of Islamic spirituality. It's like there's one story that's mentioned in the book also where these men came and challenged Rabiah Basriyyah. Rabiah Basriyyah, she replied to them. So, and I'm giving you just one reply of us. One reply was that every prophet was born in the lap of a woman. So the nurturing of each and every person is dependent on the woman who's nurturing him. So for any individual, this is why we emphasize the importance of the women as far as Islamic spirituality goes. Because in restoring their stories, we're restoring a more complete picture of what Islam actually is.
For me, when I read this, I commend you and your team on, for multiple reasons. Is that as a literary scholar myself, I feel that having written it for Muslim women and Muslims to read is commendable on its own, but to be able to present material in English for a wider readership when we are constantly fighting against media that demonizes us, media that makes Muslims look backward, oppressed, and all of those derogatory senses and terms in a time of great and rising Islamophobia. I think this
Mm,
work is so incredibly powerful in being able to push back against that, to make Muslim women feel proud of our heritage. And Jazakallah khair and Mubarak once again to you and your team for such an incredibly written publication that I hope that everyone will be gifting copies to our young teenagers in our homes, and every household should have a copy of this book on their bookshelves, inshallah.
definitely, inshallah. Our intention behind this production of these books, our intention is we have this in the back of our minds that we're printing these books in English. We're hoping that people will buy it. We understand that there are different types of readers. Like some are going to take the book just to put on the shelf, and some are going to take that book to read it. But we have this intention in our mind that, if, for argument's sake, let's laugh over it. Let's say that book doesn't benefit the individual who bought it. But let's say 100, 200, 300 years down the line, that book is still sitting on a shelf. And some person walks past and picks up that book and they read it. And by reading something in the book, they find an inspiration to rectify and change their life and come back onto the obedience of Allah in the way of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And in making this change in their life, what an effect this book has had on people 300 years down the line. That's one of our reasons for doing this work also. And Jazakallah to you so much for having me on your show. It,
Mm.
uh, it was my first time ever doing an interview, so I've been a bit nervous. I hope that I've given enough information for everybody.
Milana, it was an absolute privilege to have you on the show. Nobody would say that this was your first interview. You've given us such a wealth of information to reflect on, and the book itself is an incredible reflection for anyone who reads it. I know I've read it quickly because of the interview, but I plan on going through it and sharing it with my household, because everyone in our household are deeply sort of readers, both, but also would enjoy and appreciate legacy material like this, inshallah. So we wish you everything of the best with this and further publications. I have some ideas that we will send your way as well. And inshallah, we do wish you everything of the best, and we hope to have you on the show again. in the future.
Jazakallah so much. Jazakallah so much. And keep in touch, inshallah. Thank you for having
Ameen
me.
thumma ameen. And so there you have it. We spoke to Maulana Mohammed Rajah today on our first episode 1 of season 14 about this incredibly beautifully written publication, Rabiah Al Basriyyah. Please do get yourself a copy. It's will be available directly from Maulana. We will have the information up, and it's from Mirath Publishers in South Africa. I strongly and highly recommend this beautiful publication. And we had an incredible honor to speak to Malana today. That's it from us on this weekend's edition of Book Bites. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.